Evolutionary scientists believe that Homo sapiens, as a species of animals, is several tens of thousands of years old. They are opposed by creationist scientists, among whom there are also renowned scholars, who believe that the age of humanity corresponds to the biblical beginning. And if we adhere to the Byzantine era, or the era from the creation of the world, also known as the era from Adam, the first human appeared on Earth 7,533 years ago, as of the current year 2024, according to the widely accepted Gregorian calendar. Evolutionists cite the results of radiocarbon dating of primitive human remains as evidence of humanity's antiquity, extending several tens of thousands of years. Creationists also rely on scientific research that refutes the conclusions of evolutionists. For example, creationists argue that diamonds contain carbon-14, which, according to their official age of millions of years, should not be present in diamonds at all, since the half-life of the unstable isotope carbon-14 is 5,730 years, and over millions of years, there should not be a single atom of carbon-14 left in diamonds. Yet, significant amounts of it are there. Therefore, creationists conclude, our planet is much younger than its official age of 4.5 billion years, an age that natural diamonds bear witness to. Carbon-14 has been found in various fossil samples, in dinosaur fossils, coal, oil, marble, and so on. The list is extensive. Creationists have caught evolutionists on carbon-14, which does not yield an age greater than 50,000 years for even the oldest fossil sample. Moreover, creationists reasonably reduce this 50,000-year figure by several times, even by an order of magnitude, since the Earth once had a stronger magnetic field, which hindered the formation of carbon-14 in the atmosphere, and consequently, its content in the living, bones of humans, animals, and in living wood was much lower than it is now, which in turn brings the actual age of our planet closer to its biblical dating of around 7,500 years, or a maximum of 10,000 years, as creationists believe. Evolutionists, in turn, do not relent and present their counterarguments. For instance, they claim to know the exact age of ancient Egyptian tombs, and this age corresponds to the age of the wheat grains found in these tombs. Using radiocarbon analysis of this wheat as a reference sample, they construct calibration curves with sufficient scientific accuracy, as they believe, for radiocarbon laboratories. Thus, this ancient Egyptian wheat can serve as a marker and standard, like similar units of mass or length, but specifically for chronological research. How precisely scientists have calculated the age of ancient Egypt and its wheat is something we already know. The colors of the pagan pre-Christian temples of ancient Egypt were still quite fresh in the 19th century. And at the end of the 16th century, the Great Pyramids of Giza did not yet exist. Instead, there were some pointed pyramids standing on hill stumps, very similar to the Nubian pyramids in modern-day Sudan. And as those who have watched my early films on this channel already know, the geography of Peter the Great, published in 1710, states directly that the Egyptian kingdom was a very ancient state practicing idolatry. It also states that, in the early 18th century, the Egyptian kingdom still existed and paid tribute to the Turkish Sultan. Watch my earlier films in the playlist, Not Ancient Egypt, where I discuss the Egyptian pyramids and Egypt in more detail. And that's the end of scientists' claims that their organic samples from the tombs of ancient Egypt are several thousand years old, which they use to calibrate radiocarbon laboratory instruments and construct calibration curves. Now imagine if the wheat from the tombs of ancient Egypt isn't 4,000 to 5,000 years old, as Egyptologists claim, but only 400 to 500 years old. In that case, radiocarbon dating results from laboratories worldwide would differ from the actual age of a given sample by a factor of 10, overestimating its age. This leads to a natural question. Is there a more reliable measuring instrument to determine the age of humanity? Yes, such a measuring instrument exists, and it is called demography, the science of the numerical development patterns of populations. Using this science and its mathematical methods, it's possible to calculate fairly accurately when humanity was born. That is, when the hypothetical Adam and Eve, from whom we all descend, appeared in the world. For creationists, the discovery by genetic scientists that all people on Earth regardless of nationality or race, descend from a single mother and a single father. The very same hypothetical Adam and Eve was a great revelation. We will discuss this a bit later. Now, let's address some questions of biblical chronology that are crucial for understanding the further narrative. Readers of my book already know that, according to the Bible, Adam, the first human on earth, was created in the middle of the sixth day of creation. And considering the second epistle of Apostle Peter, which says that 1 day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is 1 day, one divine day of creation equaled 1,000 earthly years. Accordingly, biblical chronology initially held that Adam was born in 5,500 from the beginning of creation, the middle of the sixth divine day. That's why dates in the Julian calendar were called Anno Domini, short for Anno ab Incarnatione Domini, in Latin, meaning in the year of the incarnation of our Lord, in the body of Adam. But later, the Roman Catholic Church lengthened the history of Christianity and changed the meaning and context of these dates from Adam to from Christ, and added 9 years to the dates from Christ, to distance the pontificate of Pope Julius II, the author of the Julian calendar, from the year 1500, the year this calendar was adopted. I won't retell the chapters of my book on the Julian and Gregorian calendars here, as that would take too long. And before we move on to the official theory of human origins, Darwin's theory of evolution, I want to raise another question, one that many of you may have asked yourselves in your youth, but didn't find an answer within the framework of the official lengthened history of Christianity, and thus of world history. The question goes like this: how could it happen that, until the 15th, 16th centuries, before the so-called Renaissance, humanity stagnated for several thousand years, not improving tools of labor or war, and building the same rowing ships? Then, suddenly, for unclear reasons, humanity rapidly accelerated in its development, covering the journey from crossing the Atlantic on sailing ships to spaceflight, nuclear weapons, computers, the internet, and artificial intelligence in less than 5 centuries. No one has ever truly answered this question for us. Let me remind you that before the advent of money and markets, people lived through subsistence farming, which was closed and self-sufficient. In this state, in a state of subsistence farming, humanity could have remained for quite a long time, if not for the desire to exchange the products of their labor with neighboring tribes and peoples. Before the village form of communal living, humanity existed in a primitive state. Let's outline all 3 stages of civilizational growth. Primitive culture. This includes hunting, fishing, and gathering wild plant fruits, mollusks, and similar resources. Neolithic, or village culture. This stage includes not only hunting and gathering, but also subsistence farming, still without goods for a market, as markets and market relations had not yet emerged. But metallurgy, glass, and the weaving loom were already present practically everything that existed in medieval towns. Only the towns themselves were absent. And the third stage, urban culture with a new type of settlement, the city, where the population could afford not to engage in agriculture, but rather in crafts and trade, since money had appeared, a reliable intermediary between the city and the village, and thus a marketplace in the city square, where anything could be bought for money. By lengthening the history, for example, of Egypt and its cities, historians had to invent a non-monetary or moneyless period for the existence of ancient Egyptian urban civilization. This was necessary because they aged Egypt's cities by 10 times or more. Yet no equally ancient archaeological coins were found for them. Now, let's return to the second stage, the village pre-urban culture, when the expansion of a tribe's population pressed against the lands of a neighboring tribe. Conflicts inevitably arose, which forced people to think more actively and invent new ways to defeat their neighbors, or at least to defend themselves. If new types of effective weapons weren't invented, their land would be taken, and they, their families, and their entire tribe would be killed. Thus, war was, and, unfortunately, remains the primary driver of progress and the most advanced technical thought on Earth. And the second important point, which is often overlooked, as soon as people adopted a sedentary lifestyle and took up farming, the world's population began to grow at the fastest rate in human history. Women gave birth to many children. There were no contraceptives. child mortality was high. But unlike in modern cities, not just 1 or 2 children survived to reproductive age, but at least 3 or 4. And how did the level of medicine and hygiene in the 19th century differ from, say, the 15th century? Practically no difference. In villages, medicine only appeared in the 20th century, and even then, not everywhere. Women would give birth right in the field during farm work. Thus, it's safe to assume that birth rates and child mortality in rural areas in both the 19th and 15th centuries, at least in villages where the majority of the world's population lived, were practically the same. This means that the growth dynamics of the human population were roughly the same for centuries. In the mid-17th century, having 8 to 10 children in Russian peasant families was the norm, despite the complete lack of medicine and hygiene. In European countries, large families were also common. Humans have always had, and still possess, a unique ability that no other animal species has. This ability is the continuous expansion of territory and the ability to find food in the forest, steppe, mountains, water, everywhere, from the equator to the far northern and southern latitudes, except Antarctica. This extensive growth through new free territories inevitably led to a steady increase in the overall human population on Earth. Since the 19th century, population censuses have been conducted regularly, which means that with several points on the graph, we can calculate approximately when humanity roughly transitioned from its primitive stage to an agricultural one, during which population growth on our planet was at its fastest. According to the official scientific version, this occurred in the 10th millennium BCE. This era is called the Neolithic, the New Stone Age, when humans learned not only to make tools and hunting weapons from stone, but also to build stone houses and even the first cities. Let's take 1930 as the starting point of our retrospective. The primary population growth came from third world countries, both then and now. In the first half of the 20th century, the level of medicine in rural areas of developing countries, as we call them now, was roughly the same as in the Middle Ages. That is, it was practically non-existent. Only healers and midwives, often with dirty hands, as the concept of hygiene only emerged in the 19th century. Even now, around half of the world's population lacks basic healthcare services, and this is primarily in those countries or certain provinces within them where population growth is the highest. At our chosen starting point in 1930, the world's population was 2 billion. In 1830, it was 1 billion. Doubling occurred over 100 years. It's logical to assume that similar doubling rates existed even earlier. This period is notable for the massive loss of population, revolutions, and civil wars across all continents except Australia. The First World War. The Spanish flu, according to some sources, claimed up to 100 million lives, about 5% of the world's population at that time. Plus, the genocide of indigenous populations in some countries. History had not previously witnessed a population decline of this scale. And despite all these losses, the population continued to grow at a geometric rate, roughly doubling every 100 years. And the lower the level of medicine, paradoxically, the higher the birth rate and population growth in a given area. Because today, medicine not only works to increase human life expectancy, but also, unfortunately, to drastically reduce it. No world war compares to the losses from abortions. Using an electronic spreadsheet, we build a retrospective and arrive at a population of 1 million by the mid-9th century C. 1 million. This is, more or less, the estimated population of Homo sapiens at the beginning of the Neolithic, according to the official scientific theory, with conclusions that can be agreed upon. What factors could have significantly slowed population doubling every 100 years before the appearance of the first cities? There simply aren't any. Epidemics appeared in cities, not in villages, when people began to live in very crowded and often unsanitary conditions, without any concept of hygiene. Until the mid-19th century, even doctors didn't bother washing their hands before surgery, let alone the general population. Quarantine, as a tool for preventing epidemics, also belongs to the Renaissance, or more precisely, to the era when urban civilization emerged, bringing epidemics along with it. Sailors and merchants became the first mobile class, and therefore carriers of various infectious diseases. Conversely, in the Neolithic era, that is, before cities existed and villages were self-contained, epidemics could not have existed on Earth in principle. Urbanization didn't accelerate population growth, or rather, it slowed it down. Urban families have fewer children than rural ones. By the beginning of the Neolithic, that is, the beginning of a sedentary lifestyle in villages, humans had all the conditions to double their population even faster than every 100 years. To achieve this, let me remind you again, medicine is absolutely unnecessary, just as it is unnecessary for other animals to increase their populations. This is a table of human population growth, based on 3 reproductive children per mother. One generation is estimated at 30 years, with a large margin. Women typically had at least 3 children, and usually gave birth to several children by the age of 20. Grandparents are not considered in this table, although they also influence the overall population size. As we can see, just 3 children per woman, reaching reproductive age, leads to a doubling of the initial population in 60 years. That is, over 2 generations of 30 years. In reality, it happens even faster, as most women before the 20th century began having children at 15-16 years old. The population of any living species depends on the size of its food base. Wildebeest, for example, cannot expand their food base beyond the boundaries of their natural habitat. As a result, their numbers, like those of other wild animals, have long since stopped growing or are actually declining for various reasons, due to the fact that wild animals have long since reached the boundaries of their natural habitats. But for humans, the habitat and food base are practically limitless. The entire globe, including rivers, lakes, seas, and oceans. This is why the human population continues to grow, and at this rate, will reach 10 billion in about 30 years. The actual doubling rate is not even 100 years, but 50. The statistics in this table are deliberately skewed to lengthen the doubling period in the past to align with the official theory of Homo sapiens evolution over tens and hundreds of thousands of years. Not long ago, in the 19th and 20th centuries, families in Europe, let alone in Asia and Africa, had not 1 to 2 children as they do now, but at least 3. Moreover, China's policy, as the most populous country in the world, encapsulated in the slogan, "One family, one child," significantly impacted the overall birth rate dynamics. But even despite China's demographic disaster, with approximately 400 million unborn children over 4 decades, the doubling of the world population over the past 50 years is an established fact. As a result, it's impossible to claim 12,000 years of agriculture. Instead, we're looking at a maximum of 1,000 years, during which the population grew from 1 million, the beginning of a sedentary lifestyle, to 2 billion by 1900, 30 and to 8 billion today. In the last 1,000 years, humanity has gone through 2 phases of civilizational growth. First, learning to live in villages through subsistence farming, and later, through money and the market of goods and services, learning to live in a new type of settlement, cities. All right, let's assume that the Great Flood was not just on the pages of the Bible, but also a real event. And perhaps it didn't destroy all of humanity except Noah's family, but only half. Yet population doubling occurs every 100 years or even faster. This means that any delay in population growth due to a catastrophe of such a scale would have only lasted a maximum of 100 years. After that, population growth would have resumed at the same rate. However, Western European politicians needed Darwin's evolutionary theory spanning millions of years as the scientific and ideological foundation for strange sciences, such as eugenics, whose founding figure was Darwin's cousin, Francis Galton, and social Darwinism, eugenics' sibling. Darwin's evolutionary theory became the scientific, in quotation marks, justification for racism, Nazism, and the mass extermination of certain peoples by Europeans in their overseas colonies. In the 19th and 20th centuries, in Western Europe and the United States of America, it was believed, and some still believe, that humanity's growth can and should be stopped by forceful measures, as there won't be enough food for everyone. This is the so-called Malthusian trap, depicted in this chart. Notice that closest to the trunk of the tree named eugenics are its roots, labeled as anthropology and statistics. Statistics with millions of years of evolution form the very foundation and a supposed scientific justification for eugenics and social Darwinism. And right beside anthropology is history. Two boots on one foot. And now that we're talking about Darwin, tell me, who is considered a species relative of humans? Monkeys. Don't rush. A tiger and a lion look different from each other, but they interbreed. The cat family. Horses, zebras, and donkeys also interbreed with each other. Even camels and llamas, separated by the Pacific Ocean, produce hybrid offspring. But on what basis humans were classified in the order of primates, that is, apes, is entirely unclear. Despite scientists' efforts, there has never been a single successful case of interbreeding between a human and an ape. Understanding the absurdity of Darwinist theory on human origins from apes, yet recognizing its political and ideological advantages, Europeans, the main beneficiaries of this racist theory, began searching for the bones of the ancestor of modern humans. In their view, this had to be something between an ape and a human, and they found them through the German social Darwinist Hermann Schaffhausen. Based on just one find, these bones were declared the missing link between apes and modern humans. Thus, Neanderthals were invented. Precisely invented, not discovered. In the second half of the 19th century, the British colonial empire, upon which the sun never set, urgently needed proof of human evolution and the origin of human races from lower animal species as an ideological foundation and justification for European racism. As a result, scientists were commissioned to create a theory of human origin from apes, and Darwin was one of those who provided a brilliant scientific rationale for this political demand. If we overlook certain details, here's what he wrote in his famous book, The Descent of Man. At some future period, not very distant as measured by centuries, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace throughout the world the savage races. At the same time, the anthropomorphous apes, as Professor Schaffhausen has remarked, will no doubt be exterminated. The break will then be rendered wider, for it will intervene between man and a more civilized state, as we may hope, than the Caucasian, as they referred to the European race, and some ape as low as a baboon, instead of as, at present, between the Negro or Australian and the gorilla. End of quote. The world-renowned scientist Darwin, whose fame was promoted by European and global media, and at the same time an outspoken racist, calmly speculates that inferior races will eventually be eliminated by more developed races, or at least he hopes this will be the case. Let's return to the Neanderthals, who, according to anthropologists, differed little from prehistoric humans, such as Cro-Magnons, except for purely external characteristics. Both groups knew how to make fire and used tools for hunting and labor made from sticks, ropes, and stones. This is how Neanderthals were depicted by anthropologist scientists in the late 19th century, deliberately emphasizing their ape-like features. And here is a modern computer reconstruction. The brow ridges and cheekbones have been slightly enhanced with silicone, but without it, they appear as quite normal humans of the Caucasoid type. Pronounced brow ridges, to varying degrees, can still be found today. It's just that anthropologists serving political interests needed to find human skulls with supposedly transitional interspecies traits, and so they found them. And of course, Darwin's theory of evolution required millions of years of evolution, no less, because scientists couldn't find or present the public with any transitional species over the past few thousand years. This is a very lengthy process lasting millions of years, say evolutionists, which is why no changes are visible over the observed historical period of several thousand years. Understanding that the bones and skulls of Neanderthals were clearly insufficient to prove human descent from apes, and given that Neanderthals were practically indistinguishable from modern Europeans if you remove the silicone enhancements added by anthropologists, evolutionists continued their search, and in 1924 found an incomplete skeleton with features of both human and ape, later named Australopithecus, meaning southern ape, auster in Latin south, pitikos in Greek ape. Creationists, the uncompromising opponents of evolutionists, rightly pointed out that Australopithecus cannot be recognized as the missing link in human evolution, as there is morphological evidence that Lucy was a knuckle walker, like present-day apes. Additionally, the dental structure of Australopithecines indicates that these apes primarily consumed plant-based food. But despite the fact that Australopithecus resembles a chimpanzee more closely, it is still considered a distant relative of humans, though with less certainty than in the 20th century. The next point where evolutionists face challenges is the so-called mitochondrial Eve. In the mid-1980s, scientists studying mitochondrial DNA discovered that all people on Earth are descended from a single woman. Similarly, through the paternal line, all humans descend from one man, the Y chromosomal atom, a serious blow to the reputation of Darwin's theory of evolution. Faced with the fact that all modern humans are descended from one woman and one man, a point strongly embraced by creationists, evolutionary scientists devised the model of the so-called lucky mother, and similarly, the lucky father. The essence of this model is as follows. Alongside the woman whose descendants we all are, there were also other women, thousands of women. But over generations, the descendants of one woman dominated over others. Exactly how and why they dominated is unclear. As a result, over a long period of time, tens of thousands of years, all other maternal lines gradually died out. And of course, this is complete nonsense. Such a scenario is possible with a very low probability for at most 10 original maternal lines, as shown in this model. If, however, there were initially 100 or even 1,000 women in this genetic race, the probability of all these maternal lines ending except one is effectively zero. With each new generation, the number of women only increases, making the chance of one single line outcompeting all others infinitesimally small. To summarize, all people alive today are descended from one mother and one father, at least genetically. And no one disputes this scientific fact. Neither supporters of the divine theory, creationists, nor followers of Darwin's theory, evolutionists. All conclusions suggesting that there were originally many human mothers, but that all their maternal lines gradually died out, leaving only one, are simply assumptions by evolutionists. And by the way, the computer model of the lucky mother has still not been created. Or perhaps it was created, but its results were unfavorable for evolutionists, which is why it hasn't been published. The age of humanity's ancestral mother is estimated to be around 155,000 years by evolutionists and about 6,500 years by creationists. Both sides attempt to adjust the results to fit their own religion. Yes, Darwinism is also a religion, based on faith that humans evolved from apes. For Darwinism to become a scientific theory, it lacks one small thing: a proven transitional link between ape and human. And the doubling of humanity every 100 years, or even faster, stands as a verdict against all theories of human origin suggesting an age exceeding 2,000 years. Science knows of no global catastrophe or series of catastrophes over the past 3,000 years that could have slowed the doubling of Earth's population by more than 100 years on average over this period. And this is not even about the mass death of people in certain regions of the Earth as a result of various local disasters, which undoubtedly took place. The point is that, as a result of these disasters, the human food base remained practically unchanged. This means that the plants and animals that humans relied on for food remained available in sufficient quantities, especially with the advent of agriculture and farming, allowing humanity to roughly double its population every 100 years. Even in the coldest country in the world, Mongolia, where there is virtually no fertile soil and thus no agriculture, only nomadic pastoralism, the population has not just doubled, but increased fivefold over the past 100 years. I am not a supporter of creationism or the divine origin, as it is presented in the first book of the Old Testament, Genesis. At the same time, all the above facts inevitably lead to the conclusion that life on Earth is secondary and not the result of evolution, at least on our planet, but rather the work of a higher intelligence. Fine, let's say it's aliens observing us like laboratory mice, and perhaps even occasionally intervening in our development to prevent us from causing a nuclear Armageddon or something similar to ourselves and our planet. Most likely, the first humans on Earth were clones from a hypothetical test tube in an alien genetic laboratory. What other options remain if we all have one common ancestor and one common ancestral mother with an initially embedded mechanism for genetic mutations? And strangely enough, every species of living creature, even sperm whales or, for example, squids, also has its own species-specific mitochondrial Eve and a molecular biological atom. This is highly reminiscent of Noah's Ark. Only in this case, the Ark was an alien spaceship with a genetic engineering lab on board. I am far from thinking that all races on Earth descended from a single human pair, the hypothetical Adam and Eve. The time is too short for such racial mutations. Most likely, there were more than 2 humans from the alien incubator, perhaps several hundred or even several thousand. And they already had racial differences embedded within them to adapt to local conditions during the initial settlement of Earth across all continents except for the cold and nearly lifeless Antarctica. At the same time, they all initially shared an ancestral genetic code from the genetic lab, which scientists today call mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosomal atom. Perhaps the person who wrote the Bible suspected or even knew that life on our planet came from elsewhere. Evolution had nothing to do with it, and that every creature, just like humans, had one ancestor and one ancestral mother. For those who want to know more about the lengthening of history, subscribe to my channel and purchase my book, The Other History of the Roman Empire. That's all for today. I would sincerely appreciate your likes, comments, and shares of my films on social media. Thank you, and until next time. This was Alexander Tomansky.